Evening, Kevin. Yeah, are we recording now?
Evening. Apologies, I'm a few minutes late.
Okay, recording has started. Okay, welcome everybody to the August meeting. Goodness me, the year rolls by so quickly, doesn't it? But the good weather continues, so that's not so bad. I hope everybody's well and you and yours are well as well. So let's go to the agenda. Apologies, Christy.
We have apologies from Rob Pickering, Peter Bulmer, we've got Councillor Amanda Miller in his place, Tim Kenny, Chester Business Club, David Beer has obviously moved to different work area, Kathy Partington from the Zoo, Bernadette Bailey from the CCG, Alex Bell is reported absence, and Anya Miller, I think she's off celebrating exam results, so that's good. And Lynn Mackay from our side of the organisation, well, from the organisation, is not with us today, sorry.
Lynn Mackay, right. Okay, so as usual, I'll ask people to give a quick introduction to their role on the team, just so that we've got it recorded on the tape, so to speak. So, Tammy.
Good evening, Tamara Hunt, Sustainability Officer for the University of Chester.
Great, thanks, Tammy. Roy Newton.
Hi everyone, it's Roy Newton. I'm the Transport and Investment Director at Cheshire and Warrington Local Enterprise Partnership.
Okay, thanks, Roy. Stephen Perry, yep.
Hi, Stephen Perry, representing the Active Travel Forum on this forum, but also chair of the A51 Active Travel Lane and the Love Your Upton team. Thank you.
Thank you. So Bernadette's not with us tonight. Anya's not with us tonight. Andy Farrell.
Yeah, Andy Farrell Limited, representing the Chester Bid, and the Chester Growth Partnership.
Great, thank you. Mike Garrett. Mike, I know you're here. I saw you earlier. So.
Mike Garrett, representing Freight Interests and having worked on the A51 corridor.
Okay, cheers, thank you. Stephen Hughes.
Hi, yes, I'm chair of the Chester Sustainability Forum.
Great, thank you. John Beckett.
Joint lead of the South East Chester pilot with Peter Bulmer.
Okay, great, thank you. Kevin.
Yep, Kevin Riley from WSP, consultant to Cheshire West and Chester Council.
Okay, and Christy.
Sorry, mute. Christy Littler, Transport Manager at Cheshire West and Chester Council.
Okay, thank you. And Amanda, can we welcome you? I think you're here on behalf of Peter, I think, aren't you?
Yes, I'm here on behalf of Peter. I'm from Great Walton Parish Council Transport Group.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, have I forgotten to introduce any of the standard members of the team? Kathy, do you want to quickly say hello? No, okay. No, I think we're probably done there. Okay, that's fine. So let's carry on down the agenda to declarations of interest. Does anybody have a declaration of interest in any of the items? I mean, we've all got an interest in the items that we're going on today, but an actual financial or otherwise kind of interest in the proceedings tonight? No, okay. And we have then the minutes for the last meeting. As usual, thank you to Andrew for putting this together. Can I ask you first if there are any corrections that you feel should be made to their representation of what we talked about? Fairly detailed meeting. Okay, and therefore, can I ask you to approve these? Is anybody any reason why we don't approve these?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So thank you, Andrew, for those. So we then move on to number 6, the project updates. Now, I've been in touch with each of the team leads, because we normally have a sequence of updates at this point. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly trip around. We haven't got any presentations tonight, so just in case any of the team leads want to say something, here's a quick opportunity for you to do so. So I'll start off with Andy. Do you want to?
Nothing much from last time. What we hope to do is, after doing some writing up, get the group together again. It's a bit difficult this month. It's been the summer holidays, so probably next month we'll all get together again.
Okay, great. Stephen, for your two groups. And you muted, sir.
Sorry. Yeah, the active travel group in Boreham enjoyed a few pints of beer in the Architect, which was an important meeting. We also had a very nice walk around with Kevin and other colleagues from the South East Chester pilot, and are delighted that the Mini Holland bid is being prepared for that area, and we've given as much support as we can, and hopefully sufficient support to Lucy, and obviously willing to help as much as possible. Otherwise, there's been a holiday pause. With regard to the Love Your Upton group, again, the work continues doing little bits and pieces in the background, although it's mainly a holiday month again. And I think in particular, we're looking forward either at this meeting or fairly soon to have some sort of interaction with the council with regard to their thoughts on the travel lane along that route. But otherwise, things are in a bit of a holiday lull. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. John.
We had a meeting where we reviewed the Mini Holland bid process, and I think just saying simplistically, I'll save my comments until later. If the bid's successful, clearly there'll be a process, but we're quite keen, if the bid is unsuccessful, to continue to a point where the design is done and finding a way of funding that. So our behaviour will sort of reflect that. Okay. And we also are keen really that there's a seamless way of making sure that the representatives of the community do have a sort of a continuous way of making inputs to the design as the design proceeds, to make sure that it reflects what all of the community would want out of it. So again, that will come out of our discussion later. We looked at the numbers that came out of the Crystalton High School travel survey, which is just an incredible piece of data actually, in that we now know exactly how many children use exactly what routes, why they don't use other routes, and we actually have got the gender differences. We understand why most girls actually walk to school and most boys actually get on bicycles, and so we've got a lot of rather unique data there, which I think will be interesting to those who've got schools in their areas. We reviewed the highway code change, which is significant, and we also had a look at cycling and walking across the A51 and the A51-55 junction and the A41 junction, and concluded that in the request that we've made recently for those two junctions to have an independent review rather than a Highways England review, that also includes access for pedestrians and cyclists. So I think that's it for the time being, and I'll save most of my comments after we've heard from Kevin and Christy.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Thanks for that. Yeah, good bit of work there. Thank you. Nothing to report from my group, really. We've done some work on the Rural Mobility Fund, but Christy's probably a better person to update on that. But the initial surveys that have gone out have been quite promising in their return. So I think that's quite good. So, but mainly we've been getting down on the stations and starting work and getting people back on trains. But very little to report as far as Sustainable Transport Task Force development is concerned, so little from my group. Okay, thank you for that. That was quick compared to our previous weeks. So down to item 7 then. So if I could ask, I don't know which sequence you want to do this, whether Christy wants to come first and then Kevin, but how do you want to do this?
I'm giving it that much thought. Apologies. I've only got a bit of a verbal update in terms of where we've got to, and maybe Kevin might add additional elements if there's anything from the project side of things. But yeah, I just wanted to update the group because obviously we mentioned last time that we were looking at the proposals from DFT or the funding application from DFT and considering our options. So a number of you will be aware that we did put a bid in for the Emergency Active Travel Fund. So I'm getting them muddled. The Mini Holland bid, sorry, I'm getting all sorts of funding out mistakenly. The Mini Holland bid we put a bid in for, sorry. So an expression of interest for that. So that was one of 12 local authorities will be chosen if successful to apply for feasibility funding to develop a scheme further. So we identified the A51 corridor from the bars to the A41 Hamburger roundabout, and we have put that submission forward. It's been endorsed by the leader of the council and also the deputy leader of the council who represents transport and environment. So that's where we're up to. That bid went up on the 6th of August. Obviously heavily influenced by the work that's been done within the groups here in order to get the momentum and to get the ideas flowing. So that's, you know, we're grateful for that. Thank you. In terms of the Active Travel Fund, I should have said, this one we consulted on 3 schemes previously, which were Helsby, Northwich, Weathram schemes, and a Hertford scheme, not Chester Way and Chester Road, sorry, and a Weathram scheme. When we went back and reviewed the work that we'd done and the likely costings, we found that, you know, affordability wise, that the Helsby scheme was a lot more intense than we'd originally envisaged. So we prioritised the Helsby scheme for the March 22 deadline for delivery. We then spoke to DFT and asked whether they would reconsider or accept a submission for the next tranche of funding for the remaining 2 schemes that we wanted to deliver and were consulted on, and they were appreciative of that and they endorsed that. So we've put in a bid for those 2 schemes, and I will just show you what I'm talking about just quickly. So these are the schemes. So this one is Northwich Road in Weathram, if you can see that. So this is as far as we can within the constraints of the road. We're LTM 120 compliant, so it involves a shared use path. The blue one is in set A, and the green section here towards the school is this sort of segregated footway and cycleway scheme there. And then the second one that we've consulted on, which doesn't seem to want to open and is closed, in fact, was Chester Way. So that was in Northwich by the Memorial Court. I'll see if I can launch that open again once I update you on the GP prescribing. So we've also put in a bid for GP prescribing for an expression of interest. This was again with the DFT announcement, and they were looking for one of four local authorities in the country to be selected for GP prescribing, whereby in areas of deprivation and poor health, you would be prescribing walks and cycle rides to people to improve their mental health and physical health as well. So we've put that bid in with the Ellesmere Port Client Commissioning Group. Working with public health colleagues, we determined that the best area to focus on would be Ellesmere Port for the borough. If we are successful, we will have to develop some capital schemes potentially for delivering infrastructure to accompany it. So we await the outcome of that. I'll pause there and I'll try and find the other design for you. I don't know if Kevin's got anything to add while I squirrel away my filing system.
Okay. Yeah, Christy, I was going to say, I mean, I think, yeah, firstly, once again, thanks from me to the people around the table who contributed to the Mini Holland bid. That's where myself and my colleague Lucy have spent quite a bit of time over the last kind of couple of weeks, making sure that sort of met the criteria. And in my view, the basic criteria was a 2-page letter to DFT from the leader of the council that we made an early decision to sort of expand upon, and the information that people have fed in from this group, a lot of that directly went into that expression of interest that we did a sort of supplementary piece for. And just to sort of allay any fears. I can quote you sort of directly from the sort of document that was submitted. The council works very closely with a sustainable transport task force made up of representatives from local cycling walking groups, Chester Business Improvement District, residents, disability groups, and clinical commissioning group. Representatives of this group have been involved in shaping this expression of interest and fully on board with the proposals, providing some letters of support as appended. So, yeah, thank you to everyone for contributing to that document. I'm also hoping it's kind of been a sign that actually, you know, we are trying to sort of make sure that where we have that information, we're using it and we're putting it forward. And just to sort of also reassure people that part of the commitment of that bid is that we would, you know, as part of the funding, develop an engagement strategy and plan with different methods of consultation with the range of groups that are involved. Clearly, that would include the people relevant from this group to if we're successful in the funding. So I think actually it's a really good example of where we've been able to sort of take the benefit of this group and apply it to a live bid. And I think in the time, you know, we've hopefully done justice to the sort of to putting a credible bid in to Department for Transport. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I've got some questions, but from Stephen in a moment, but just really to kind of highlight the point you made there about having something that was almost ready to use.
Yeah.
And I think it was Andy Farrell who's mentioned in the past that one of the successes of these type of task forces is to produce that, is to have this, you know, this rack, if you like, of projects which are just about ready to go, so that when the appropriate funding comes up, we can dress them properly and then put them in.
Garfield, if I may just sort of interrupt there, I mean, one point I would make is actually one of the criteria set was about consultation. The fact that we had the ability to demonstrate through this group that we've already got active consultation,
yes,
puts us in a really good light and position. I think that's a value that we shouldn't underestimate. Yeah,
great, thanks for that. Stephen.
Yeah, thanks for what you've done, everybody, on that and taking the lead, and thanks to the local authority. May I just go back though to what Christy was saying, because I often get asked questions on this subject and I get confused. Just for clarity, Christy, if we talk about, let's call it tranche 1 of emergency active travel funding or whatever it's called, that put in the cycle lanes and also had other things last year. Am I right to say that tranche 2 is what you would originally plan to apply to Helsby, Northwich and Hertford?
Yeah.
And so just for clarity, so what we're now saying is that because of the nature of the Helsby proposal, we're going to prioritise that and put the bulk of the tranche 2 funding into that plan or proposal and look for additional funding at some time to address the other two mentioned, Northwich and Weaverham. Is that correct?
I may have confused. So as you say, Emergency Active Travel Fund was kind of tranche 1. Tranche 2, we put the submission in, which were the 3 that we consulted on, and the plan that I need to load up. So I'll do that while I speak. So this plan for Chester Way, I think somebody's waiting in the lobby. Andrew, if you could let them in. This one for Chester Way was a tranche 2 scheme. The council, as I say, the Helsby scheme was considerably more expensive when we'd done some further ground investigations, etc. So the council's having to match fund that quite considerably. So I think it was that kind of compelling case that we put forward to DFT that, you know, we are funding the Helsby one. We want to complete something in its entirety rather than a piecemeal approach, and therefore could we transfer two of the tranche 2 schemes, which was the Chester Way and the Weaverham scheme, into this tranche 3, although DFT aren't calling it tranche 3, and we will still need to match that as well. So so that's where we're up to on that one.
Thank you. And again, sorry, this is helpful detail. And the tranche 3 has not yet been funded by DFT. Is that correct? But we're hopeful it might be.
So that was the application we did in August, along with the Mini Holland, and so we're still in August, Mini Holland and the GP prescribing. So we'll hopefully find out in the autumn. That's
great. And the last question is the 206,000 or something, I've got that figure in my mind, that has been successful, and I've seen notification of this somewhere, that applies to what we're calling tranche 2, does it?
There's 203,000 thereabouts of revenue funding that's affiliated to that. So the council has committed to working with the schools along the route as well. So we'll do some intensive sort of school travel planning activity to publicise those routes as well. DFT have acknowledged the fact that they're delivering it late to the authorities, that we can maybe roll that over into the next financial year as well. So we can do work over the 2 financial years. It will also involve revisiting our LC whip. So clearly the plans that we put into play for tranche 2 were quite embryonic, if you like, and therefore need to be worked up into a detailed design. We've obviously had LTM 120 that's come along since LC whip was developed, and therefore we're putting some funding aside to develop those schemes to make sure they're still relevant, that they can be LTM 120, and to get them to a design ready phase for when funding becomes available for the next tranche.
So the details exactly how you'll spend the 203,000 is yet to be finally decided, is it?
We have mapped it out with DFT, so there's chunks affiliated to it, as I say. So a substantial chunk is with the schools. A substantial chunk would also be about getting the right detailed design for those plans, so they are off the shelf. Like Andy Farrell and others have said, we should be having these kind of schemes on the shelf. And there's elements of maybe there's grant and walking and cycling groups within the borough, I should say, rather than the organisation, to do utility trips and also short trips to try and get people familiar and confident. Cycle training as well, obviously, for all abilities and disabilities.
Okay, well thanks very much for going back to that. I'm sorry to take you back in the agenda, but that's useful for people to know that. Thanks very much, everybody.
Yeah, Stephen has this capacity for putting about 5 questions inside one. But, excellent. Andy.
Yeah, thanks. It was really arising out of that conversation because I got confused with all the schemes. Would it be good, Kirsty, to have a plan which shows these as they collectively happen or are collectively proposed, so we can see how the big picture is building up? Because, for example, I saw just a couple of weeks ago a consultation on cycle lanes along the ring road, for example, the inner ring road. So, that's obviously happening in a kind of separate universe as well. So it'd be useful to have these plotted so we can see see where they are and how they join up.
I'd agree with that.
I'll think about that, and obviously we'd have to update our cycle maps as they get delivered as well. But yeah, we can.
It could just be a blob on a plan. Doesn't need to be anything sophisticated.
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly. John.
Christy, that was very helpful, a description of the Active Travel Fund. I suppose I'm asking a basic question about how schemes actually qualify for it. So, for example, in the South East Chester cycling plan, we've actually got work in Great Bolton around discontinuous cycle routes that need to be made more continuous. We've got new sort of cycling routes from Huntington across to the high school. We've got a variety of different schemes. How do you get those schemes considered for these tranches of Active Travel Fund? And I know that these are already sort of called for, but thinking of oven-baked schemes sitting on the shelf, how do we get them qualified?
I think this goes back to the conversation we had last month in terms of what the criteria is for DFT and for the Active Travel schemes. They were largely reliant on the LC whip and those adopted policies that we've got in place and the plans that are within that. So from that point of view, we had to prioritise schemes that were within the LC whip. So that's our 10-year delivery plan for the council's active modes at this point in time, and that's where the council's priority for funding will be allocated going forward. In terms of any sort of developments that come forward or any other bits and bobs that may, as you say, maybe missing links that are quick wins, then obviously we can deal through some of those through routine maintenance, but obviously need to have a scale of an idea of the scale of the scheme before make those kind of assertions, really. But I'd say the LC whip is a priority. Other things may come aboard but priority would be to deliver the LCWIP at this point in time.
So we had a team that produced a cycling plan for South East Chester, which complied with LCWIP requirements. Is that now part of the LCWIP for the authority, or is it still sitting in a
the LCWIP was adopted
somewhere on
in
the
July
site?
last year, so the adopted LCWIP was the work that the Active Travel Fund put together. So they're not currently in there, but obviously we've got to consider any funding that may be available separately that may be able to fund some of those initiatives.
So how do we get them in though? So they're sitting there in the plan, their ideas, it's a description. You've got most of the documents, we've sent them to you. How do we get them into the LCWIP plan?
I think once the LCWIP is, if it's refreshed and revised at any point, once we've completed some of those initiatives, that's the opportunity. But clearly the 10-year plan gives us, a significant demand on resource, financial resource going forward, and we have to deliver that in the first instance. They're the ones that have been consulted on widely.
John, I think I mean, this does go back to a bit of the conversation that we had when I went out on site with yourself. That ultimately, I think the challenge that the authority have is they have to follow the process set down for production of the LCWIP. They have to sort of do a prioritisation exercise at the time it's produced, and clearly it is a moment in time, and that document then has to stand. I would suggest, and Christy's quite right, that is difficult for the authority to update whilst and until sort of there's a refresh done. I think the first priority at the moment is making sure we get sort of things moving in the LCWIP and get the things in the LCWIP implemented. That doesn't mean though that anything that you've done behind the scenes or want to start to think about promoting and putting into the next version of LCWIP when that's refreshed is wasted. It's just that we have to, there has to be a process, there has to be that system, because ultimately otherwise it's kind of just goes back to sort of almost being reactive to anything that's put forward to us. And the whole point in LCWIPs is, it is the implementation plan, and therefore it has to be, I suppose, planned in advance. And no matter how frustrating that is, I think the authority will attract more by following that plan. As Christy says, there are other things that come out that may end up allowing us to sort of jump in and accelerate that. And I think it's also, I mean, the recent Mini Hollands bid was a really good example of how actually the authority is ahead of the game in some respects in terms of having done the LCWIP. So, for example, I can tell you that Shropshire, for example, haven't done the LCWIP yet. They were advertising to consultants like me to do it a few weeks ago. But by having an LCWIP, that allowed us to make quite a strong case of that in the Mini Hollands bid, which was one of the key criteria we had to meet. So, although it might be slightly frustrating, we have to follow that process, and that plan was developed at a moment in time, and it almost it does mean that there's a I wouldn't call it a drawbridge down, but drawbridge up. But there is a bit of that kind of, we have to get on with that plan.
So
and start to encourage you to develop almost things to go into the next level, the next stage of it.
So when will the next review date be for the LCWIP, would you imagine?
I mean, I would suggest, I mean, I don't think there's been specific, because these are fairly new, there's not been specific guidance about review of that, but I would imagine it's a sort of, it's going to be a couple of years cycle to refresh them. We have to keep them fairly up to date, don't we? Because things will change, but it's not going to be a sort of, every year or so. Ultimately, I think that the challenge is, it is a 10-year plan. It will need refreshing, but it's going to, it will be, in my view, it'll be a couple of years before that's fully refreshed.
Suggest we take this offline, possibly with Christy or Andrew, and sort of work out how we should plan to do that. That's all. Yeah, because we've got a plan that's sitting there. It's not being used.
Yeah, and I think that will be the same I tend to agree. I mean, it's probably not one to prolong the meeting with today, but it's one where actually, you know, the LC whip is almost, it is a, I suppose what I'd ask everyone to see it is view it as a step forward from anything that was there previously. It's not perfect, and one of the challenges for an authority like Cheshire West and Chester is it has to sort of it's got a big geography to spread the jam across, I suppose, and therefore, you know, we have to try to you know, we don't get necessarily such a dense network as we would like, so we have to prioritize, and that was what was done with quite a lot of consultation that I know some around the table here were involved in. So that has to stand for a while. So, but then beyond that, you know, I think the kind of work you're doing now in this group can start to set the seeds of when that is refreshed, when the time's right, revisit it and add it in, or well, add it into the equation to be prioritized. It's a process, unfortunately, that we have to, you know, and it can be a frustrating process. But
no, we're not frustrated. We just need to know what the process is. So I think we should take that offline, and we'll work out when those plans can be considered for inclusion in the LC whip. Okay.
Yeah, no, I agree. But what I would say is, you know, having that LC whip did help quite a lot because that was one of the big criteria in the Mini Holland bid, and I think it's strengthened it. So yeah, there's a benefit where things don't necessarily always work quite as quickly as we'd all want them to. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Garrett.
Oh yeah, thanks, Garfield. So I think, to be honest, what John was just talking about and Kevin's reply pretty well picks up what I was going to say. But certainly, if this group is going to come up with propositions, and I go back to our last meeting, Andy Evans produced a kind of proposed strategy based on evidence, basically identifying those trips which are currently conducted by motor transport, which could lend themselves to transfer to active travel. If we can't use that kind of emerging evidence, which comes out of the analysis, it does seem rather a shame. So the idea of things being locked in stone for a while, but I'm just repeating what other people have just been saying. So I think we do need a process which means that there is some dynamism. Otherwise, you'll lose people's enthusiasm.
Just to respond, Garfield and Mike, I don't think there's anyone around the table who wouldn't necessarily disagree with you on that. I think the challenge for us is we, you know, as an authority, it is, you know, it's a process. We have to go through that. We have to be seen to be doing that. By doing that, I think we potentially attract more funding and get things implemented quicker. And it's a delicate balance because there's no one that doesn't welcome, you know, the interest, the enthusiasm. I think this partly come on to the sort of the debate that we're going to have on future structure and format of the group and the purpose, etc. Because actually, having put a series of ideas on the table, you know, the important thing to me now certainly is to think about how we use the group in helping support, track funding and develop those ideas to implementable schemes.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Christy, I've got one on the GP prescribing bid. That, if I remember rightly, was to get people to recommend that people do more exercise, to walk and various other aspects of increasing people's health and fitness. And you're looking at doing putting that in place in the Ellesmere Port area. So is there a scope for our group then to actually put a group of people together who could actually kind of generate ideas and work this forward, or is it a different approach? How is it going to work?
I think at this point in time, the expression of interest was largely around sort of the Ellesmere Port area, and there's 6 GP surgeries dotted around there that are interested. I think we've given quite a compelling case in terms of some of the health and deprivation type statistics for the wards. So I think from that respect, we tick some of the boxes that the government are after. But I think we continue to liaise with the client commissioning group to see which of the GPs are more interested if that is the case. And then I think it's a matter of kind of understanding, if we are successful, what we can do in those particular areas. We've got some local growth fund investments funded by the LEP there. So we've got some basics of continuous routes, some leisure routes and some utility routes. And it's a matter of kind of building on those bits of infrastructure that's already there, that might help improve people's even life chances to get to work, etc., and things like that. So at this point in time, I haven't got a firm plan as such, but I think there's definitely roles that we can play in that, because obviously the Ellesmere Port industrial area links to the Ellesmere Port town centre, and obviously upskilling and on all those other different facets that would come into it's bigger than just a transport scheme, isn't it? I suppose is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, you don't need me to tell you just how interested I am in the whole of that zone, whether it's public or industrial. Okay, so thank you on that item 7. So Christy, back with you on item 8, I think. Yeah. Okay,
can I just check if John Beckett's got his hand
up?
Sorry.
I didn't know if that was Alex's hand. Yeah.
An important issue. I wouldn't delay you for something unimportant, but this is important. This is a sort of a communication and consultation process. We can communicate with each other. We can sort of identify projects that need to be considered. But once a project is up and running, we need a different process for involvement of people. And Peter and I are quite sort of clear that the transformation down the Boughton corridor is a very, very intimate sort of project, which will ought to involve businesses, ought to involve residents, ought to involve ward councillors, should involve some representatives of the Emergency Travel Lanes Group and South East Chester. And when the design process kicks off, I'm presuming there might well be a workshop right at the front end. Then I'm assuming that there'll be a design review sort of every week or 2 weeks, so that, as you go along, you get inputs from all the key stakeholders, so that when you finish the design after 8 weeks or 12 weeks, you've actually got a design that's got input from local residents, from businesses, from CWAC officers, but everybody is happy with the product, and you don't suddenly find that at the end you've produced something because they haven't been involved and nobody likes it and you have to start again and you've run out of design time. So I'm assuming, Kevin, that there will be a process like that, because I know quite a lot about this stuff and I know you do, and we ought to plan for it, because if we win, very quickly the design money will be available and we'll be talking about how we're going to progress the design. And we'd like to sort of see a very inclusive process designed. So I'm not suggesting we do it here. It's not for this group, okay? But I think there needs to be a discussion about what that working group looks like. If we could agree in principle that there is a working group who works on the design, we can separately decide who's in there.
Okay, I mean, just John, I don't think there's any doubt that we would want to include a consultation process, and I'm hoping the fact that we did that workshop on the Mini Holland bid with a sort of the relevant group here did that. I think we also made a bit of a play on the fact that actually the people around this group are the keys to getting out to the local community in many senses, and to a range of different groups. I think it would be a requirement of any funding that we did that anyway. We've committed to doing that. The form of that, I wouldn't like to say, partly because it would depend on how much money is given. Partly it would depend on sort of things like the timescales they set for us to sort of design and develop things. But I'd see it'd be, clearly community consultation with stakeholders would be a relevant part of that. I have to be honest, I don't think it would be a weekly meeting or a bi-weekly meeting. I just think actually and I think you're possibly being a bit optimistic in sort of the 9 to 12 weeks. I think you just said. I think I suspect a design for a corridor like this probably a little bit longer, quite a lot longer than that.
Yeah.
sort of 3 to 6 months, I'd imagine, sort of minimum, and we'd need to look at all sorts of things like available data, the nature of kind of what we actually how we actually needed to spend and wanted to spend the money, what technical work are we going to need, and part of that equation is what have we got from groups like this. So but I think it's not necessarily my role to commit to sort of saying absolutely everyone will be part of this process or in exact form, but I think there's a commitment I know there's a commitment in the bid to liaise with communities, and that was something we made quite a lot of. We did it deliberately to acknowledge the fact that we've got this group. Let's use it.
It's a bit more than liaison, actually, Kevin. This is actually a few key people. You put a drawing up and you say, this is where we've got to with the design. I don't know what the frequency is. Are there any comments? And there might be Mike Garrett in that group, and he says, well, hang on a minute, you've missed this issue, or could you consider this? Somebody from the businesses said there isn't enough parking in the right location for the businesses in the Bourton corridor. A resident says it will be useful to have seats in these sort of locations, and you collect those sort of inputs very early on. You don't end up with a design at the end with everybody saying we don't like it.
No, I think any good consultation exercise tends to at the very minimum have a sort of what I'd call a knowledge gathering, views gathering exercise, and then a design sort of commentary exercise with it. I think the scope and nature of that will depend on sort of what's required in detail once hopefully we hear positively. I think it would be and it could be actually consultation, for example, could be taking out an empty shop unit and having a series of boards with people kind of manning it, and maybe that might actually be the people around this table that we say, actually, could you help us man it? It could be anything like that. I think we've got to work through that. I suppose my comment is, I agree there's a degree of planning to do, but I think it would be probably a bit preemptive to start to do too much of that before we know where we're heading with it. I think typically you might get some sort of early indication from DFT if they're minded to take us forward on this. But undoubtedly there's a commitment to work with the community.
Yeah, what I'm used to though is a sort of a core team who are involved in the design. So I would imagine that one or two of Stephen Perry's team would need to be involved regularly because they designed the sort of scheme at its heart. People like Peter Bulmer would need to be involved because he's actually produced clear pictures which is presented to this group on what would be included in the Bourton corridor. So for me, Kevin, it wouldn't be sort of a spattering of interactions with different people. It would be quite focused. You'd select the people, there'd be a team, you'd meet with them regularly, you'd show them how far you got with the design, and then at the end, you'd have inputs from all of them. That's what I'm suggesting is appropriate.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think as I say, really, we're not going to get to the bottom of that today, but I think there'd be the need for consultation, involvement, and let's work through that as and when the time's appropriate. And I mean, to be honest, there's increasing emphasis on things like involving schools, children, etc., and those kind of things as well going forward. So there's a whole selection of people that we'll need to consider. But rest assured, the purpose will be to come to this group and firstly, I'd imagine you'll be some of the first ones to know of any result, and to certainly in the sort of in the external world you would be, and secondly, we'd want to be looking at how we harness what we've got to the best of for the best of the scheme. So yeah, I don't want to commit to specific type or people or anything like that. I think it would be.
I would suggest we talk about it outside and take it out and agree that we do that and design the process. That's what I'm asking for. That it isn't sort of somebody finding they've got 100,000 and saying, well, we'll do this and we'll do this and we'll do this, and there isn't a sort of a clear plan for involving the right people at the right time. That's what I'm suggesting.
That plan
you can't possibly do all your schemes and be successful if you operate like that. You must have a plan for the consultation, and we're saying, could we be involved in it?
Can I just interject? Sorry, because the DfT has laid down specific consultation that we'll have to undertake, which is similar to what we did for the Active Travel Fund scheme. So if you look on our website, I can send the link. So, you know, we have to set up a stakeholder plan of all the people we need to engage with. Obviously, this group and parish councils, etc., would be on that list, the Active Travel Forum, etc. And quite often people want to see something in front of them before they can actually to visualize it in order to make comments on it. So I think the way the DfT have suggested we go along with the active travel schemes particularly was to come up with a scheme and then to consult on those as well. So I think there's elements of, yes, you can contribute to it, but I think people want to see something in order to make comments on it as well. But we do have to follow those prescribed criteria from the DfT, which is quite clear as well in terms of what they're setting down for us.
Would you start with a workshop though, Christy?
I think, John, I
think we can take it offline, but I think, you know, we do need to have those sorts of clear ideas put down. I think, you know, happy to discuss that with you later, but I think, yeah, or even something at the Active Travel Forum or whatever, but yeah.
I mean, the meeting is recorded, it's minuted, John, so you...
No, I'm fine, I'm happy with that. We'll need to talk about it as we go along.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. Stephen? I think we'll make this the last question.
Yeah, just two very brief points. First of all, you know, the South East Chester team and the A51 travel lane team will obviously be very happy to work together in whatever way is required. I think you've got the message already, Kevin. The only other message I want to share, and I realise this is very early days and we're talking about perhaps longer term in the future, but if the bid is not successful, within the context of the prioritisation you're reviewing across all that's happening in the borough, I would at least like to put a marker in the ground that says if we're not successful, we find a way of building on what we've already achieved to make sure we have an even more oven-ready plan for any future funding. So, you know, Mini Holland's failure is not failure. It's just another step we have to go through.
Yes, absolutely. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Always develop onwards. Yeah. Okay, good. Well, thank you for that. That was very useful. Yeah, very interesting. So let's now move down to number 8, National Bus Strategy. Christy, an update, I think.
Sorry, I managed to mute myself in the process of doing that. Apologies. Am I sharing my screen? Can you see the presentation?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just trying into slideshow mode. Right, okay. So I think there's been a couple of references to, you know, the National Bus Strategy, and we haven't necessarily discussed it at this group formally. So I just wanted to let you know where we're up to on that, really. But before sort of doing that, just to kind of give you the context around what the bus picture looks like in Cheshire West and Chester, really. So we've got about 7% of the routes that are commercially operated, are not commercially operated. 93% is commercially operated and 7% is operated by the local authority. These are deemed to be services that are not profitable and can't be commercially run. They might be socially necessary. We have some criteria, you know, in terms of access to employment, education, addressing social isolation, for which we will target our limited funds at. At the moment, we have about 80 commercial services running in the borough by 8 operators, and we have 9.4 million journeys. These are pre-COVID, sorry, 9.4 million journeys taken each year on the bus network throughout the borough, and that's on a sort of decreasing picture, if you like. It was sort of 10-11 million previous to that. We have one quality partnership, which is the Blake and Pointer service, which is a voluntary quality partnership with Arriva and Stagecoach, so people can interchange on the same ticket, which is, you know, normally if you get off a bus you have to then pay for another ticket for another journey, where these are interchangeable on that route. So we've got one really good example of quality partnerships, and we're striving to do better. So this map just really outlines what the network's like. You can see in the rural areas it is really patchy. The red lines, obviously for the more dense areas of Chester and Ellesmere Port, have the higher frequency, like similarly in sort of Northwich and some of the cross-boundary services over into Cheshire East and into North Wales. The blue routes are less frequent, and when you get to green, some of those could be like, you know, twice a week kind of services. So a real mixed bag in terms of the services that we currently operate, and a real kind of struggle to try and change and improve the picture with the National Bus Strategy. So just to recap, really, it's a declining bus patronage that we're trying to tackle. So to get bounce back will be considerable effort, really. We've got a reduction in concessionary pass holders as well, so they're sort of your over 67s, women's pensionable age who get a pass to use the bus, and the context really is, in Cheshire West we've got pockets of really high car ownership, we've got pockets of quite considerable wealth and equally quite considerable deprivation. We've got inadequate ticketing facilities for people to swap between modes and between different operators, limited evening and weekend services that don't really feed the nighttime economy. We apply the English concessionary pass scheme. We don't do any additionals to it. So in other boroughs, you might get free transport at the age of 60. So, we haven't really got the funds to do those kind of initiatives. We've got, more people working from home with the COVID outbreak, and we obviously increased in online shopping and things like that enforce the picture. Parking policy can encourage people to drive. It seemed to be cheaper than it is to use the bus often. And we've got obviously car dominated travel within the borough. And we've also had declining budgets over the years to tackle bus services. So in light of that, and I think it's probably not an unusual picture across the country, government have launched Bus Back Better, which is their sort of national bus strategy, and within that they obviously want to see buses as tools for inclusion and a mode of choice. So they want to convert smaller, shorter trips into bus transport for those that are able to, and obviously that complementive travel modes as well. Within the bus strategy, they've set an ambitious target, so we have to have an enhanced partnership in play by the 31st of March. I've put 2021, but it should be 2022, apologies. But the steps towards that is that we had to acknowledge to DfT by the 30th of June that we wanted to develop an enhanced partnership with our bus operators. And by the 31st of October, we have to have a bus service improvement plan, which will then lead to the culmination of the bus enhanced partnership by the 31st of March 2022. So the strategy is really, really important because obviously it's the means by which we can access future funding. The scale of our ambition not only influences how much bus funding we can get, but future transport allocations that we may get from government as well. So they want us to increase the number of evening and weekend services. They want people, to have turn up and go services. They want to upskill the local authority officers in order to, be fully conversant and in bus travel and bus services. Sorry, we would need to put bus priority measures in play in order to give bus a priority, to increase journey times and to make it a mode of choice. To encourage zero emission buses. So obviously £120 million have been put into that by government, but really just to improve the attractiveness of bus so that it is a mode of choice for the many. To do that, as I say, they want more frequent turn up and go services. They want fast and reliable. They want better ticketing, and offers cheaper fares and integration of modes, and demand responsive transport potentially in rural areas to supplement the commercial services, and just making it easier to understand so that people who don't usually use buses are able to do so, that they're not dissuaded from doing so either, and that will involve heavy marketing and promotion of bus across the nation, but obviously in Cheshire West and Chester as well. So the bus service improvement plan, which is our deadline for the 31st of October, supplements the enhanced partnership, and this is the means by which we will improve and transform bus travel. The enhanced partnership is the plan and the detail of how we deliver that. So within that, they're saying that the bus service improvement plan, is a collaboration with local bus operators, the community, transport bodies, and local businesses. Obviously, coming to this group as well, be interested in your thoughts. But that we should cover the full local transport authority area, so the full Cheshire West area, urban and rural elements as well. and that we should be consulting with operators in how to address under provision and over provision. I don't think we really suffer from over provision in our borough, but clearly we need to address the under provision. And we need to set out the objectives of the strategy and how we can grow the bus use. And the plans need to be updated annually, and they need to be reported on as well. And clearly how ambitious we are, as I said, kind of reflects how much funding we get going forward. So, as I say, the opportunities for us are developing the enhanced partnership by working with the bus operators to deliver improved services. Any bus operator that doesn't buy into the enhanced partnership limits their opportunity to access future funding from government. So there's a clear imperative that we should be working together, and we should be sitting around the table to work together, which we are, which is good news. And that, you know, the government are also saying that it's integral to the levelling up agenda, which is obviously key at the moment. So buses are seen as key to the transport network across the nation. We've been really lucky, as Garfield said before, that we secured rural mobility funding. And so we're hoping that some of those pilots that we're undertaking at the moment can be transposed in different areas of the borough as good examples that we can take forward, whether it's demand responsive transport, linking to bus or rail services, etc., to improve connectivity. But clearly we need to be, you know, tying in with all the government messaging. So, and we are, because they align with our climate change policy. We have Poverty and Truth Board. We obviously know that young people are the future, and we need to get more people onto bus. And making bus a mode of choice. So understanding how people and why people who currently don't use bus, understanding how and what we can do to make that or enable them to do so. So our bus strategy, we're hoping will encompass all these bits of work, and we've done a number of sort of pieces of work to get there. We've had a bus review task group, so that's been made up of a number 11 members from different parties and across the geography, looking at barriers to transport, home to school transport, local bus, park and ride, and also rural and community transport. We've had meetings with operators, so we are sort of understanding what they can bring to the table and what we need to do to work with them to improve journey time mobility, to improve the services, and to try and get people back onto bus. Government have allocated £100,000 in capability funding to help develop the BSIP, the Bus Service Improvement Plan, and we did a competitive tender, and we've appointed McDonald's to help us undertake that work. We've also have the advantage of the LEP work that's ongoing at the moment, which will hopefully inform some of the sub-regional thinking and cross-border issues that will play out in our thinking. The meetings with Mark McDonald's are continuing. We're shaping the plans, we're gathering the data at the moment, but we are also asking residents of Cheshire West and Chester for their views, whether you use the bus or not. We're interested in people's views. So, you know, what would encourage you to use bus? What is discouraging you from using bus? What can we do better? And we will use that information not only as a council, but obviously to go back to the operators in terms of some of the asks that we've got from them. So this link I can put in the chat if people want to share it. That would be really useful. But I appreciate I've just given you a really quick whistle-stop tour of the Bus Service Improvement Plan and the National Bus Strategy. But I was conscious that there's not an awful lot to tell you at the moment. I can send you links to the National Bus Strategy if anybody wants to read it. But, you know, that's kind of a summary of where we're at. And speaking to operators, you know, they're probably at, you know, 60 or 70% of their current bus patch, of their previous bus patronage, and really getting to where they were pre-COVID is a struggle. So this is really quite an ambitious task that we have ahead of us, really. So I'll leave it there, but I will put this in the chat so that anybody who wants to complete the questionnaire can do so. Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. I think of all the schemes that we've talked about currently and previously, this is probably the biggest challenge, I think. To be honest, I would love to see public transport used to the extent that it is in London and Singapore and New York and places like that, where, you know, it is really the hub of communities. And we've got a long way to go for that. But at the same time, if you don't start somewhere, you won't get somewhere, will you? So, but I think that springing off this, that once these ideas that you're collating start to gel into some form of shape of a plan, I think there is a great deal of opportunity then for extending that out, radially from the hubs you think of, or the schemes you think of. So I'm really hopeful that we can move this. I think that as far as climate change is concerned, public transport, whether it's rail or bus, has got to play a place, and to make it more attractive is a real challenge, I think. Because to get people to say, well, my car's in the drive, but I've got to walk down the road and wait 10 minutes for a bus. We've got to somehow change that attitude. So thank you for the summary. Andy.
Yeah, one of the kind of disappointments I always feel is that we tend to very quickly compartmentalize things. We're producing a bus strategy. And we kind of extend that to public transport as how it's really important. But I guess, what I'd like to see at some point is some renewed thinking about a transport strategy. Because we all know what we're trying to do is to get the kind of linkage between all modes and the transfer between modes, and to use the new thinking to enable that to happen more effectively. And very quickly we move into separate camps. Whereas the world isn't quite like that anymore. So I guess it's Kirsty and other transport guys from the council. When are we moving to see a more kind of forward-thinking transport strategy for Cheshire West? I actually don't think Cheshire West is a transport area, actually, myself, because I don't perceive much linkage in terms of transport between Winsford and Chester. Chester, has more linkages across the border and to Wirral than anything else. However, putting that aside, that's just me. When are we going to see a more kind of joined up and rethought transport strategy?
We have to, within the bus strategy, we have to embed it within the local transport plan as well. So we've been talking about potentially refreshing our local transport plan as well. And I think obviously the bus strategy probably needs to be a further stage of development before we start on the local transport plan again. But there's elements of bringing in or further embedding the air quality messages, the climate change messages, the new active travel and the LTN. And I think it needs to be a more cohesive piece of work. But you are right. I think, the local transport plan is set to be revised at some point in the very near future. But I think there's elements of trying to get the bus strategy in a bit more of a understood format before we can bring it all together, really. But I think that's definitely on the horizon. I haven't given a timeline, have I? But yeah, it's on the horizon.
No. You see, I would perceive that you do the transportation strategy first, and the bus strategy clicks into that and produces a bit of it, and then links to the other bits. I know the world isn't so nice and tidy as that. I know you have to produce a bus strategy now. I know that, but it's just to get this parallel thinking going, really, because otherwise I think we'll miss a whole load of tricks.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I've got a long list of questions here. So, Roy, can we keep these questions quick so we can get through these? Yeah.
Mine's more a couple of statements than a question.
Yeah.
And the answer to Andy's point there, yes, indeed, there needs to be an integrated strategy. But as ever, the government publishes something and gives timelines for responding to it, and therefore local authorities have to respond to government timelines. But the important point here is, if you do have a bus service improvement plan and an enhanced partnership, you then have access to a portion of the £3 billion of government funding that's then available. And that's a mixture of capital and revenue, which is going to be important. So you have to play the game to get the money to allow you to do it. But you're absolutely right, Andy. It can't be done in isolation. Definitely needs to be done as part of an integrated transport strategy. And of course, that was my second point that we're going to make, Garfield, is that obviously we can't just look at the independent Republic of Cheshire West, because that's not where all journeys start or finish. Needs to be close working with Transport for Wales, with Merseytravel, with Shropshire, with Cheshire East, with Warrington. So there's an awful lot to do in a very short space of time, but you don't have to do everything by the end of the financial year. We can put markers down as to things that can then be developed as part of the enhanced partnerships and future bus service improvement plans. But I don't envy Christy having to do all of this in the timescales that are available.
No, not at all. Okay, thanks, Roy. Mike.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to make a plea for data. I heard Christy make the point that there are only 9.4 million passengers a year in the borough, bus passengers. That compares with about 5 million people who go through Chester Station alone a year, and very roughly in the survey data we're using on motorised trips, maybe something like 600 million trips by private transport. Question: will the MOTS study quantify out the features of the 80 services? Because you're absolutely right, Christy, that's a mix of twice a week to a village and the Blacon Circular, so to speak. So it would be interesting to know how many buses an hour there are, or bus kilometres per year, and so forth to the supply side, and whether one could accumulate better demand data, because I think it's quite important to actually consider what works and what doesn't. If you're doing a study, we've got enough evidence, I think, within Cheshire West to actually compare and contrast and actually objectively work out what works and what doesn't. So that's the questions from me.
Mott MacDonald's currently, so we've obviously got a data sharing agreement with the operators at the moment as part of the partnership. So we're gathering data from them at the moment, hopefully down to service level. The trouble is some of the smaller operators who, are also driving buses at the same time as trying to get their data, but we're trying to help them as much as we can. And sorry, I can't read my own writing on the last bit. Sorry, whether we could accumulate better demand study. That doesn't make sense to me. Sorry, I can't read my own writing.
No, I was only making the point that within that data there should be a lot of evidence as to what works and what doesn't.
Okay.
And drawing lessons from that.
Yeah. Okay. No. That's what we'll do, and we'll also supplement with the survey that I've put in the chat as well, in order to find out what new customers might want from services as well. So whether it be location or other aspects within that. So yeah.
Okay, thanks. I've got Kevin and then Amanda. So Kevin.
Yeah, mine was just a sort of quick comment in that, partly to sort of mirror, I think, what Roy said, that once again, unfortunately, the local authority has to respond to the things that come out of government. And one thing certainly that I've noticed over the last couple of years in particular is that things are often more compartmentalized, as in like a bus strategy, a cycling strategy, a public realm strategy, will come out as a different type of competition. So it is a challenge for local authorities. And just to sort of highlight, I mean, I think one of the reasons I've been brought on board, now I'm sort of past the early stages of my sort of induction, I suppose, into Chester, is to help start to do some thinking at very senior level with sort of some of the very senior officers, talking around kind of how do we start to get that integrated, thinking going. And I've certainly had a good conversation with Andy probably a month ago now. And it's about all those things that Andy mentions, but also thinking about land use and the shape of the place as well at the same time, because that's what will really make it work, is how if we link people to jobs, to education, etc. So yeah, just to reassure you, we are doing some sort of what I call very long-term visioning, even beyond things like VSIP. That's a sort of response to recognition that's the way things are heading.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Amanda.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry, I haven't said a lot so far, have I? Okay, it's a question for Christy about the reviewing the huge number of, was it 80 service providers, I think you mentioned. My concern is about Park and Ride, and I know that's run by Cheshire West and it's not a commercial operation, but it occurs to me that it is a duplication of routes, and that the Park and Ride can only pick up and drop off in certain locations. It's duplicated by service buses, which can pick up along the route at any bus stop. And, you know, I see in Great Broughton here, I see an awful lot of buses passing me by with no one on them. And I just wondered if you have any data that you're reviewing as to who exactly are the Park and Ride users, where they're originating from, because it just seems to me we don't need two systems running in parallel.
Park and Ride is obviously separate to commercial bus services, and we can't extract passengers from the commercial network. People that use Park and Ride, I admit there's not many people using it at the moment, given the current working from home mandate. But yeah, you know, people who are using Park and Ride want the bespoke service. They want a more direct route from A to B rather than sort of stopping at regular intervals like a commercial service would be. There's different clientele as well, I would say, in terms of between some of the bus services and also Park and Ride services. In Chester's case, you know, the draw is mainly to try and keep unnecessary transport or road traffic out of the city by encouraging them to stop at the Park and Ride sites and use the bus. You know, the Park and Ride has suffered as a result of COVID, and there's a bit of work that needs to be done in order to bring it back into popularity. I would openly admit that. What we don't want to do is market it too heavily at this point in time with the sort of messages we were concerned about, potentially a third wave. So I think there's a piece of work that needs to be undertaken, and it is planned in terms of relaunching the Park and Ride services with better marketing. And also livery of the Park and Ride services. So they are different and they are bespoke, and we can't extract passengers from the commercial services that are operating, even though they're on the same road.
So you seem to be saying there's absolutely no scope whatsoever for integrating the various services. It's clogging up the roads. There's an awful lot of buses clogging up the roads, certainly through Great Broughton. So are you saying there's no possibility whatsoever of integrating them in any way whatsoever?
At the current time, obviously, as I say, we can't extract passengers off the commercial network. So the Park and Ride is a bespoke service. So from that respect, you know, the integration opportunities are limited. We do have intermittent stops on the Park and Ride service at Waitrose and on the A41. The Upton's one, we stop at the Countess of Chester to encourage people not to drive into those areas and to use the Park and Ride. But there are limited options that we can invoke on the Park and Ride in terms of what we would do to extract passengers from the bus network. I think going forward, the council has obviously got clear ambitions to revise the Park and Ride contract. But in the current state, we've got a renewal of the contract rather than a rewrite of the contract. So I think options for how we operate the Park and Ride in the future, you know, need to be investigated going forward. And you know, I think, you know, everything should be on the table until it's off the table. So, but I think for the meantime, you know, we can't extract from the commercial network.
Amanda, just to sort of add to what Christy's just said, I mean, that's part of the what I'd call the long range visioning thinking that I'm starting to help set out that you know will be thought about, and that, as Christy says, I mean, there's certain rules and regulations in the short term that mean you can't extract patronage, But if you look at where that industry is going much longer term, the metropolitan authorities are starting to talk about things like franchising of services, etc., having a bit more control over them. If that's successful, then that will cascade to authorities like Cheshire West and Chester. But that will take a bit of time. But I'm certainly doing some work elsewhere where we're looking at all sorts of options, and that's the kind of thinking that I think I'm being asked to start some early ideas, behind the scenes, starting to think about options and what are the things that we could do, and that could range from things like, for example, one of the challenges in Chester is coach parking in the city centre. So would we actually put some facilities for coach drivers to go to at the park and ride site, so that we can take them out of city centre, or so that they can actually store vehicles safely overnight at park and ride sites, right through to sort of what land uses would fit in that. And you're right, an interesting thing is that on the park and ride corridors themselves, there's a lot of what I call parallel running, so that a rural bus comes in maybe a long distance, parallel runs of a park and ride site, park and ride vehicle. Is it appropriate? Isn't it appropriate longer term to sort of try and make them be more integrated? So yeah, it's not being forgotten, I'd say, but it's I think there's huge opportunity there, but it's in a short term. I think the issues are sort of more practical on the day-to-day sort of park and ride, where we go to next franchise. Beyond that, just to reassure you really that some of that thinking is starting to be talked about, and sort of how do we take that forward. So hopefully that's a reassurance. And now I've got past the Mini Holland bit, I can start to get involved in some of that thinking.
Okay, I would like to know, is there data available on who are the users of the park and ride services as they exist at the present time?
We have a survey from a couple of years ago which kind of maps out. I will ask whether we can share that or not. That
would be very interesting.
I think that'd be useful. Just remind me, Christy, do passengers pay on park and ride?
Yes, pay for the bus but not the parking. So and we also have cycle storage at the park and ride site, so you can cycle and park and ride, and you can drive and park and ride. But yeah, it's £2 and children are free under 16.
Right, okay, that's great.
Garfield, I think that's an interesting point though, because actually, clearly all local authorities are being pressed on revenue costs in particular.
Yeah.
All sorts of ideas need to come out going forward in terms of things, ranging from sponsorship through to, for example, I was talking about a park and ride site earlier today where the park and ride spaces have been covered with photovoltaic cells, which kind of generates energy, which then is a revenue source to help cross-subsidise as well as being sustainable energy. So I think that thinking's got to go well beyond anywhere we're at in the short term now, and that's clearly it links to climate change and all those kind of things that we need.
I know you weren't on board at that point, Kevin, but if you think back, colleagues, to the presentation that York made very early on, when they'd completely changed the way in which they used park and ride bases, so that they're now EV charging points for the community in the area immediately around the park and ride. So the park and ride kind of space got two uses, kind of a daytime use and a nighttime use. So anyway, that's that. I'll leave that one in there. So Amanda, is your hand still up, or is it a legacy one? Yeah. Okay. Mandy.
Yeah, I mean, I did take it down again, but I would say that I think park and ride it will be a vital consideration in the bus strategy for Chester. It's one of our more unique aspects, as with other historic cities, and it's perhaps the only aspect which the council has some control over, actually. And in my days in Chester, we looked at more intermittent stops and all sorts of stuff, and it'd be really useful within the remit of what you can do with a park and ride system to make it more of a network kind of metro system rather than just a park and ride system. because it's it's the basis of something quite unique, I think.
Oh, it is. It is. It's just kind of making sure we get the best out of it. But that's exactly what the scheme is supposed to be doing, isn't it? So, yeah. Okay, that's fascinating, and I'd like us to keep an update going on that, Christy, if we can, because I do think it'll spawn all kinds of things for this group to be looking at. Okay, thanks, colleagues, for that. So we move down to number 9 then, which I've kind of hinted at for the last couple of meetings. And I'd like to actually kind of start the process off this evening with a short discussion on possible directions for this committee and any related ones that we feel are appropriate. Let me just put just a couple of minutes background to this. That at this point in time, then we've got 4 or 5 schemes that are sitting with council for them to be kind of worked on and to look at and to see whether they can be developed to move forward in a particular direction. And I'm not going to go into the detail now. We've done that many times, but they're now with Kevin and the larger team for them to come back to us. So if you like, our cupboard is empty now at the moment. I did say the kind of first active meeting that I chaired that there would be a second wave of projects once this first wave had gone through, and I still think that's viable. But I think it's also a very convenient point for us to actually just kind of stop and say, well, okay, are we actually doing what we've been asked to do? We have a terms of reference. I look at it frequently. I look at it, in detail before each meeting, and I think by and large we are. I know Christy's going to do some slides on this topic in a moment, but by and large, if you look at the kind of remit of our group, we are doing what we are supposed to do. But I feel there's an awful lot more that we could be doing. I think some of the more challenging areas that we could be doing, like innovation and some of the other things that we should be looking at as far as the future is concerned, we're not doing. And sustainability, we haven't really kind of touched on at all in this group. So we are, if you like, at a point where we can look at what we're doing and saying, okay, well, how do we change? How do we make this better? As an aside from that, we are aware, of course, that there are other parallel groups going on. There's the Active Travel Forum, and there are other kind of groups within other task forces being set up within the council and outside. So I thought it would be quite useful to see what people think after the first kind of 8 months of operation of this particular task force of where do we go? Does the STTF go forward? If it does, how does it change? Does it need to change? Should we merge it with the ATF? Should we look at other ways of doing things? So I thought I'd leave it there, and I'll pass over to Christy, who's going to put some kind of initial thoughts together, and then we can have a discussion at the end. We're not fully here yet of all the people who would normally be at this meeting, so I don't think we're going to make any changes tonight or even really any strong recommendations. But what I would like to do is to start gathering people's thoughts so that when we go forward to the next full meeting, and we talk to the council themselves and say, well, what do you think? What would you like to see this group do? We're starting to form some ideas. John, I'm not going to take questions just yet. Can you wait until Christy's done a presentation, and then we'll go through the questions then. So over to you, Christy.
Thank you. Apologies. Right. Okay. So hopefully I'm sharing my screen. As Garfield said, they're just a bit of a collection of slides, really. There's hopefully going to provoke a little bit of thought, and then we can have a discussion afterwards about, the future and the review as it progresses. And we'll take notes, and we'll obviously feed that back to leadership team. So I say there's only about 6 slides, and really just interested in what people's thoughts are really as we progress. So the terms of reference, as Garfield said, were really to address the opportunities and barriers to deliver ambitious walking, cycling, public transport and integrated transport projects, and to identify recommendations to the council to influence and to create high quality, vibrant, livable communities. So they kind of really fed in with the local transport plan and with the local plan and all those sort of the council's plan. It really sort of helps to inform that. and to develop schemes as we have done really. The potential themes that were identified in the terms of reference, some of which we focused on more than others, but they're there in terms of inclusive growth. We've got our hubs, etc. Health and well-being has kind of been drawn out with the GP prescribing and the Millie Holland work, as well as some of the pilot scheme work as well. But integrated within that is obviously the overarching themes of climate change, quality, traffic congestion, traffic volumes, particularly in some of the particular areas in the borough and Chester, etc. as well. Focusing on the infrastructure, and the pilots have helped us do that as well. But looking at the sort of policies, processes and resources within the council. Community engagement, we've obviously touched upon that a little bit more earlier on. Behaviour and culture, transport poverty and inequality of access, technology and innovation. So, as I say, some of these themes are being touched upon more than others, really. But we are getting there on majority of those. So, in terms of the review, really, it's what is the vision of the group going forward? We've had a lot of successes. In terms of the subgroups and the work that's been done. I think various people have thanked the work that we've done today as well, and obviously that's fed into the Mini Holland bid, which is fingers crossed is a success that we've got to that point, but hopefully we have more success to come on that as well. But I think observationally, is the group representation right? We've got attendance, regular attendance from some people and others not so much attendance. So, what could be the factors behind that? Is it the fact that it's an evening meeting? Is it the fact that it's a monthly meeting? Is it the fact that, the pilots don't seem, or the work isn't relevant to the people that aren't attending, or it's not seen to be relevant? So it's just posing those questions really. Geographical representation, I think overarchingly at the moment we're sort of mainly Chester and Ellesmere Port sort of focused, but the group is broader than that. And are there any overlaps that we think might exist? Obviously the Active Travel Fund Forum has been mentioned previously, and so what can be the opportunities going forward? We've been notified that public health won't be taking forward, they're passing on the ownership of the Active Travel Forum, should I say, to our team. So we'll have to administer that. And so there's obviously questions raised in terms of what our team can do in terms of servicing adequately and well enough the multiple meetings that we will have to service and obviously do our day-to-day jobs with as well. So the question really is how is that best managed? As Garfield said, is that to combine the strengths of the group going forward? Does it become an active and sustainable transport forum? And then we have opportunities to be more focused on the corporate outcomes and objectives aligned with policy and the funding parameters that we're often working towards. Should some elements be more council led, some partnership, and some sort of more joined up approach, and I think one of the criticisms that I think we have held, and I think we take that on the chin, is in terms of consistent and regular feedback from the council on those aspects. So that's something we would have to work on. I mentioned before is the frequency of the meeting, is that right, and the timing. So I think I've just thrown down just a few thoughts. I've not led it anywhere in particular, but I'm just really interested in people's thoughts on that. And obviously, as I say, we'll take notes and we'll collaborate with Garfield on those before any action is undertaken. But just really wanted you to have an opportunity to discuss and to pose questions, comments, etc. So I'll stop sharing there, Garfield.
Yeah, thanks. So I think the idea of having a forum for active and sustainable transport would be called FAST, wouldn't it? Which I think would be quite interesting. Anyway, that's just a side thing. So, okay, lots of thoughts coming through. So thank you for these. John first.
We talked about this in the South East Chester pilot, and we concluded that there was a good case for combining the Active Travel Forum and the Sustainable Transport Task Force, but we thought that we needed to pick out the best and most appropriate features of each of the two processes. the Sustainable Transport Task Force has a good terms of reference, which is broader than just cycling and walking. And we just wondered whether it was would be a good idea to just use that terms of reference, first of all, transpose it on top of one group, which includes the Active Travel Forum. And we note that the Active Travel Forum is, I think, led by Karen Shaw at the moment, which would appear to have some strengths as well. Okay, so that's all I've got to say, actually, Garfield.
Okay, yep, that's good. Thank you. It's a known point. So, Andrew.
Is that Andrew or Andy?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to read out Kathy Partington. She wanted some input into this because she couldn't make it. She just in her apologies. She said, I'm struggling to attend Thursday evening meetings, but would like to be a part. So that's just a comment on timings. And she also wrote, just wondering if it is worth a review of our input to this forum and whether we should also have a different dialogue. I wasn't too sure what she meant, so I just said, thanks for your minutes. Do you want to expand? And I can relay your comments as I'm doing. And she then further put, I think some of these points were raised at the end of the last meeting, but some thoughts are, would it be possible for some of the meetings to happen during the working day and not always on a Thursday evening? The group covers areas and issues, so it's not always easy for tangible measures of achievement to be possible for an individual organisation. What does success look like for the group or for those participating? Given where the group has got to, are the attendees all still relevant stroke appropriate? As I say, that was from Kathy Partington, Chester Zoo. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, they're all very, very relevant points, Andrew. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Andy Farrell.
Can I be positively critical for a moment?
Absolutely, you can.
Let's be honest here. The reason this group was set up was to help the council get out of its active travel lane mess it got itself into. For good reasons, it wasn't just the Cheshire West thing. It happened all over the place because of the nature of the funding. So we struggled to begin with because that was kind of our focus, wasn't it? And we've kind of broadened that, and we've broadened it via the pilots. But the pilots were kind of things that the participants in the forum were either interested in, had skills in, were logical or already happening. So we built upon the interest, which isn't bad either, but the feeling I had was perhaps we started in the wrong place. We started doing pilots. And lots of, I had a conversation with John previously saying, well, you know, how does this fit into a bigger picture? And then we had a conversation earlier today about where's the transport strategy. To my mind, the power of this group would have been, and maybe should be, in enabling the council, supporting the council in developing a sustainable transport strategy, from which a program would flow, which would be the set of things that we would apply for money for. And from that program would be the set of pilots. And that's the logical approach. In fact, we jumped in at the end, and hence, you know, the joining up was always a bit difficult. So to my mind, we would join all the groups together, because it seems bizarre that they have different lives. And it would be a good idea, for me personally anyway, maybe because my mind works this way, to actually start to get our head around a sustainable transport strategy. And then we could call in experts who are doing it elsewhere, experts who've done it in different parts of the world, look at innovation, blah, 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 as part of the development of that strategy. And that would be an incredibly powerful thing to do, I think.
That's very sensible, yeah, got that clearly. Thank you, Andy. Stephen Perry.
Thanks, Garfield. Yeah, a lot of support with everything that's been said so far. I'm in the slightly opposition that I come from the ATF, And I've also shared my views from an ATF perspective with Karen Shaw, who chairs that meeting. And I think there's a lot of overlap with what's been said. Just to confirm, I think whatever we call it, the group should be combined. I think the group we end up with should be chaired by the council. I say that with no disrespect at all to Garfield, and in a sense chairing may not be the most important thing, but it should be very much owned by the council. And I think that was one of the inevitable but negative consequences of this independence, which we tried to set up at the beginning. I think monthly is appropriate. I know it's not perfect for everybody, but if I draw a comparison between the two, what was wrong with the ATF, it was too infrequent in the views of those that participated. And the other thing is we never got round to working groups. So we spent 2 or 3 years, apart from the LC, which was a very important output, saying, can we have some working groups looking at things? And by contrast, we jumped fairly quickly into project teams with the Sustainable Transport Task Force. So in a sense, the genesis is slightly different. But I think, as already been indicated by others, if we bring the two together, I think we'll have a much better process. I also think focus is important. I think we can't do all the things we're doing. I think that slightly challenges the need to include other geographical areas, which is an issue and a problem that might be solved by having pilots, or no, not pilots, the wrong word, other groups in other areas, or by having the meeting focus specifically once a month outside Chester or something. Focus both in terms of its where its heart is, but also the subject matter. So I think there's lots to be discussed there. The only other thing I'd like to comment on specifically is representation. I don't want to be personal with these comments, but I think certain people have never attended from the beginning, really, apart from literally the beginning or from some early meetings. And I think I conclude that they weren't necessarily the right fit for the meeting. There are some other people who perhaps can be included, and I can be specific in another way if it helps. I think that there are also some people, and I talk specifically from my team, who've been incredibly crucial in the EATL team, and that's where they've been their primary input. And the fact they're not choosing to come to this meeting is obviously a choice of prioritization. So I think that we haven't got it perfect, but I would support the general spread of representation and the monthly meeting, but overlaid with a focus. We don't try to do too much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Kathy Harrington.
Thank you. I agree with an awful lot of what's been said already. I think that we've learnt an awful lot in the process of the last few months having run the STTF. And a lot of that can be combined with what we know already from the Active Travel Forum. My view is very like other people's views. I think we should combine the two and take the strengths out of each. Monthly meetings are very important for continuity and so that work actually gets done. I feel that it should be very council-led in terms of the fact that at the end of the day, the roads that we're talking about and the budgets that we're talking about are council-owned and have to be. So I do think that there's that the leadership has got to come from the council. And I think one of the criticisms of the current work that's been done by the STTF is that it was entirely limited by lack of input from the council, I'm afraid, and lack of data available from the council, which means that actually the work that was done perhaps took longer than it needed to. I think that there are huge opportunities to set up working groups using willing volunteers like ourselves as people who can do an awful lot of work for the council. And there's a parallel here with the NHS. The NHS uses volunteers to do various jobs. They even work in some departments doing things like ordering and that sort of thing. Obviously, they don't have any clinical roles or responsibilities, but admin jobs can be delegated to volunteers. And I would say that people who've come along to the STTF and who are interested enough to go along to the Active Travel Forum would be ideal in that role and could actually help the council hugely with their current problems of lack of resources. In terms of the representation, I do think that wider representation would be good, and I do think we do recognise that the STTF was set up as a sort of distress purchase, if you like, equivalent of, which is nothing wrong with doing that, obviously, but it does mean that it goes in a certain way and it has a certain direction, takes a certain direction, and was not set up with a structure in mind. Now, that's good and bad. It's good in that we found a way to work, but it's bad in that we haven't actually sort of systemised the work that we've been doing, and we're not comparing it against benchmarks, and we're not comparing it against policies when we're going along. Now, you could say that that's the council's job and that we as volunteers didn't know what to look at, but a combination of the two should be the sweet spot where we can actually do that. And lastly, I would like to talk about geographical representation. Now, this, ideally, some kind of combination of the two would be perfect for the whole local authority. But if we're going to make the best of the volunteers, volunteers know their areas and they know them very well. I, for example, couldn't comment when the LC WIP was being done on the areas that I didn't know, but I could comment on the Chester area, and that was true of other people. And that was apparent during the LC WIP process. So I do think that if we're going to have groups like this set up, working groups particularly, I should say, that you do have to allow those to be geographical. And maybe the council sets up a duplicate group in each area where you want some work done. And an example at the moment is Ellesmere Port, where we don't have an equivalent of the input that we have in Chester, but Ellesmere Port would really benefit from it. And that's probably the case for Winsford as well. But it's just the nature of the population that we've ended up with it in Chester. So I think working groups should be localised, maybe with some kind of overarching link up across all the groups. So I hope that helps.
Very much so, Kathy. Thank you very much indeed. And Mike Garrett.
Thanks. Well, I won't repeat what Andy, Kathy and Stephen have said, because I almost completely agree with what they were saying. It seems to me that paragraph 3 of the terms of reference, which Christy summarised in the first slide, really does imply this group should be looking at strategy, because that provides the kind of overview that Andy was referring to. I agree with what Kathy was saying there about geography, and also that what this group seems to have attracted is well-informed volunteers, and that is really well worth capitalising upon, given effectively that allows the council to better resource the transport effort required. And I think that's a really interesting direction of travel. Has to be council-led, because the council is the responsible agent. It's the Highways Authority. It's the organisation that bids for funds and all the rest of it. So what we really need to do is to find a constitutional structure which allows us to be slightly separate but advisory to the council. And I definitely think a monthly cycle is a good idea, because it creates routine and discipline, and people will turn up. Otherwise, they'll just forget when to turn up. Okay, thanks.
Okay, Mike, thank you very much for that. Andrew Blackburn. Muted, Andrew.
Just going to offer some insight from a council officer. I think Mike made a very good point that I think of groups that I've been on before, this is a group of well-informed volunteers, and the energies and the outputs, are not something that we would want to lose. what I'm hearing is there's agreement to combine with the ATF. So the next bit I'll say more of it as a devil's advocate question, and you can read between the lines my thoughts. As Stephen said, because I'm on both as well, the active travel meets quarterly in office time. This meets monthly outside of office time, and and whilst some are saying, the monthly, I'd possibly draw note to the number of no-shows, and also on that, the representation is being mentioned. I think the only British, the Cycling UK representation has been my T-shirt every month, and British Cycling as well. So again, there's suggestions: were they, should they be here? Should they not? The geography is something else, but essentially, it's finding the happy medium. I think is something that I would offer. Another insight is, I think it was highlighted about the Mini Holland. We as officers, we have limitations of what we can say and do to, albeit well-informed members of the public. In terms of data, I think it was highlighted that, we get documents that state not for publication, not for, and it's very difficult to sometimes mention that they even exist, let alone not share the information, because obviously you can gather that information and then by talking you're actually relaying it. So it's very difficult for us officers, to be able to sometimes to do what we want or is wanted to do. And I just wanted to offer that perspective, just because I'm in a minority, frankly. There's myself and Christy as council officers, and there's a lot of you. So it's just to offer that insight from my seat. And apologies if you saw my 2 young children come to give me a kiss goodnight, unclothed, again, as they often do. Again, as a bedtime meeting, it is often the way. But as I say, it's just perceptions from a myopic point of view, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, we'll take questions in a moment, Andrew, and it'd be useful if you and Christy could help me answer them, because I won't be able to answer all of them. Tommy.
Thanks, Garfield. Just to echo some of the points that have already been raised, I think Andy made a good point about it needing to have some sort of transport strategy overarching this. Looking back at the remit, we're talking about the active travel in there, but also I think for me it's the integrated transport options. So, and again, with Kathy's point about geographically, it can only be integrated if we're looking at the wider borough and then outreach. And I know a lot of the work we did with the City Living project was looking at where people travel out and beyond. So making sure that those links are connected up with both the active travel and the public transport. So I think that's kind of my thought, that we need to start looking at that integration geographically a bit better than we currently have done.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Stephen.
Sorry, just a couple of points for the record. And Rob Pickering, there's a British cycling rep that was on the team, or nominally is still in the team, and John Violet, who's the cycling team. My personal view, which I'm happy to go on the record, I know both people and like them, is that Cycling UK should have been chosen for this forum rather than British Cycling. But John Violet, who is the local Cycling UK rep, was not on the STTF, but has worked very hard in several of the project teams. So that's just for the record. And the second thing to say, and this is a personal judgment, but I think that some of the people, certainly some of the people I've worked with, and I think Mike Garrett will support this, who are on the STTF, who worked in my team, who are not here tonight, is I think they've slightly lost steam because of, we seem to run aground a bit with, where are we going and is it really worth turning out? And I don't want to be negative and I don't want to blame people. I'm just saying I think that their willingness to support is still there, but hopefully a new form will engage them as they were engaged initially. So I think that's the message to share with you, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. I think that from my own perspective, I see that we need to change. I feel that we've done, if you like, this has been the overture of whatever the opera is, because I think that we were, as Andy Farrell said, we were kind of thrown together, very, very quickly indeed as a reaction to a situation. And if we think back to that situation, the whole, if you like, ethos at that point was very volatile. Twitter was aflame. There was so much going on. There were so many nasty comments going on, and quite a lot of vitriol around. So I think the fact that we started to work on that and we started to calm that down and produce projects which would actually, if you like, help people understand the way that we can move things forward, I think took the steam out of that to such an extent that it calmed down relatively quickly. So I think from that perspective, that worked. The next stage then was to kind of work on the things that we'd kind of found, worked on the ideas that people had come up with, and to a certain extent, I agree with what Andy was saying about, we shouldn't have started with pilots first. But I think the pilots were showing exactly where people were saying there were problems and they really needed to be sorted. So I think there were probably good places for us to start. But as we've done that, we've now taken stock of where we are. We can see shapes emerging. And I think it's only natural for us to kind of say, well, OK, the Active Travel Forum does do a lot of what we do. There are better ways of doing what we're doing. We don't have a strategy. We do need to do that. We need to work more closely with the council, which is where our approach with Kevin is working. So that it does need to change. And it's absolutely right that we do that. I think the views that have come out this evening are the right ones, and I would support them. I don't think there's anything in there that's been said that I would disagree with. But I'll ask Christy and Andrew if there's anything in there that you feel you might want to add to or develop as we take these notes forward. That's all. Tom?
For me, I think it's a matter of feeding this back to leadership team, really, to garner their thoughts as well, and then to feed back to you. I think some of the conversations about resourcing and the different working groups, I think they sound really good, but I think in the back of my head, I'm thinking about the resourcing issues for the team to harness them and to give them the time they deserve. So I think those kind of things need to be fleshed out, really. And I think, Andrew's point about the monthly meetings, it might be a good idea, but equally maybe bi-monthly would be, from a council perspective, I think that might be more manageable. But again, I think that's still to be worked out, really. But that's just my initial thoughts, and obviously just my thoughts and nobody else's.
Okay, thank you. Andrew, any further thoughts?
No, it's just it's an interesting challenge, more for you guys. We will support and we will help. It is an interesting kind of a moment, for the group. And as I say in my little monologue, the most important thing I think is that, firstly the recognition of the work, but also that I think it was Stephen just said it. It's it's using this moment as a refresh to even refresh members to go forward. But hopefully, there's some context on why sometimes, it may not be that we are either seen or things can be as the group may wish or desire. Perhaps, it just can't be like that is what I'm trying to say, because of, forces beyond our control, let's say. But yeah, it's, it's going to be interesting, and just hope that, that the level of interest and, information doesn't diminish in any way, whatever happens going forward.
Okay, thanks. And Kevin?
Yeah, I put my hand up just before Christy made the point about local authority resources, because I think I do think I'd sort of almost make a plea that I do think that's an important consideration in this, that that the officer time for this is pretty scarce, and that is a reality. Probably harder for Christy and Andrew to say that than myself. It is a harsh reality that we have got. So in any decision, I think that has to be one consideration. I think people can, I think it's partly better to have less time but more quality time when we have it, in some respects, and maybe that's something to sort of reflect on as a group. and certainly I think, you know, I tend to sort of veer towards the sort of the agreement that merging active travel and sustainable transport task force is probably a good thing, because what we don't want to do is, you know, exactly what Andy Barrell's getting at. Really, we need to make this come together, not have sort of parallel streams. And I'd personally suggest that's a really important thing to be doing if we can.
Okay. I have some concerns about how we begin to produce a strategy in such a group. I think that would need careful planning and careful thought in the interim period. I'll come back to that. I hadn't really kind of developed my thought there. Roy.
Thanks, Garfield. Just a few thoughts from my perspective. Firstly, absolutely understand that there are limited resources in the local authority, both in terms of personnel and in terms of budgets. But my question, therefore, to the council would be, what would help them, and how can this group help them? And just a couple of thoughts to throw into that mix. You know, what has actually worked well here? And I think what has worked well is going from a position where everyone is throwing bricks at the council for putting cycle schemes in, to actually these are the ways that we could deliver some cycle schemes that people won't throw bricks at. So therefore, using the group for those sorts of early engagements and some early thinking could be a good way of ensuring that schemes then don't end up in that situation where you get a lot of objections. So that could be one use for the group. Again, that sort of early thinking could be used as part of strategy development, and this comes back to Andy's point about an integrated strategy. It doesn't say that the group has to sit here and develop an integrated strategy, but the group could be engaged with at early stages of that to test different parts of the thinking. And does this work? Does this not work? How does it work in a local area? And picking up Amanda's point, using some of that local expertise to understand how it might differ in different parts of the local authority. So that's just a few thoughts just to throw into the mix.
That's really useful. Thank you, Roy. Okay, we've had a lot of input there. So Christy, Kevin, Andrew, I think that perhaps we need to kind of sit down, sift through these, get Councillor Shaw involved. And I think what I'd like to suggest is that at the next meeting, the September meeting, we put forward either one or maybe two ideas for a possible shape that we could discuss at that meeting. And we'll try and make these as formed as we possibly can. You can probably tell how the voting is going to go in one particular direction, but there are subtleties which we need to sort out. Least of all, the council's involvement. If you can only do a 2-monthly meeting, how do we progress? And you know what it's like when you turn up at the next meeting and we haven't been able to progress that, so you wait another 2 months and so on. So how, in the meantime, can we progress things on that kind of bi-monthly cycle? And then, of course, obviously, there's the structure and the support of the council itself and how that works. So I don't know if you feel that's feasible, that we could perhaps have something ready for the next meeting, do you think, in a month? Any comments?
Certainly do our best. I think it's also, it's timely, isn't it? Because obviously we'll have to have a similar conversation with the Active Travel Forum as well in September as well. So to moot those ideas. So we do need to get our ducks in a row, but yeah, but I'm off for 2 weeks from tomorrow, so it gives you 2 weeks to draft that, but we'll see.
Well, if necessary, we might move the next meeting back a couple of weeks.
Yeah, that might be helpful, actually.
Yeah. Kevin?
I'd suggest that might be worth doing, Garfield, because I'm conscious if Kirsty's off for the next 2 weeks, I'm then off for a week.
Yeah, okay.
And after that, and I suspect Andrew may be allowed some leave as well, I suspect, somewhere.
Okay, well, maybe we take a decision now then to say that we don't have the September meeting and that we work through this. We let people have the holidays. We work through this. We may even call on people as required from the team that's here, and then we produce a version for the October meeting, which is a suggestion for going forward. How does that sound? Would people be okay with that? I'm not
Yeah.
I'm forgetting nods here and there. Okay, so the decision then is that we don't have a September meeting, but in the meantime, we'll arrange to meet as described with Councillor Shaw and anybody else who needs to be involved from the council side. And if necessary, I'll bring in people for support from the STTF side. And we'll come forward in October as the date that's in the agenda at the moment, to put forward at least 1 or 2 proposals, and that'll be the then hopefully we might have some updates from Kevin on the projects as well in that October meeting.
And if we hear on Mini Hollands, we will get that out to the group.
We'll get it out beforehand.
If the DFG wheels turn that quickly, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, colleagues, thank you very much indeed. I haven't been notified of any. Oh, you've stuck your hand up, Andrew. Is that a fresh one?
Yeah, very briefly, just and any other business in the chat, I have put a link to Transport for the North decarbonisation strategy consultation, which finishes at the end of this month. So I wasn't aware we were going to defer. So before the next meeting, which is obviously now definitely before the next meeting, now that it's October, if you want to have your say in the pan-regional decarbonisation strategy, the link's there, and enjoy. Yeah.
Okay, great.
And share.
Okay. And of course, we've got the mailing list, so we can always mail people and just give updates on things as and when they occur. Okay, thank you, everybody. We've just gone slightly over, but thank you very much indeed. A lot of really, really good contributions tonight. A very useful meeting indeed, and one that I think will do as well for the future. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Garfield.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.
Tough. They all went quickly, didn't they?
They did, didn't they?
It's probably because we've gone over and they're all hungry or they all need a cup of tea.
Kevin Riley's waiting in the lobby. He's coming back, or
I think so.
you there, Kevin?
Yeah.
You come into the after hours bar, have you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Right.
I think we've got Garfield. Cappy's leaving. Yeah. Okay.
I've just ejected them. Sorry.
Sorry, I was just trying to buy some time until you.
I'm just about to stop.
This is being recorded, by the way, as well, isn't it? I think is that.
Yeah, I'm stopping recording now. So I'll let that download.